Hello power users, and welcome to a new tutorial. Today we're taking a look at a real game changer, Slider Power by Gloo, which will allow you to turn any number of custom Elementor designed containers, along with all their widgets and elements, into slides for your slider, with customization options that go well beyond any slider you've ever seen. Let's take a look at what we've prepared. As you can see, this slider's slides are not simple images. They're fully designed and interactable Elementor containers. Scrolling down in the page, we'll see we have other slider effects and transitions available, like this panorama slider. The pagination here is provided automatically by Slider Power in the form of these bullet points, as are the navigation arrows. Just under, we have a flip slider. This nice cover flow slider. And even a slider with a slicer effect where we can see the scroll bar. Also automatically provided by Slider Power if we so wish. Let's take a look in the editor to see just how simple it is to achieve this. Looking at the navigator, we have this slider container that itself contains 4 more containers. These inside are our slides. Let's take a look inside one of the slides. We can see that the second slide container has an image background, but it holds another container with 2 heading widgets, a text widget, and a fully working button widget. All of this while working perfectly as a slide to our slider. These are just example widgets, but Slider Power fully unlocks Elementor's design potential inside any of your slides. To set up Slider Power, all we have to do is go to the main container, the one that holds all other slide containers. In this case, the one we called Slider. In the Layout tab, we will find the Slider Power menu. Simply toggle it on, and we're already halfway there if we're looking for a simpler implementation. Here, we will be able to choose the effect. In this case, we've opted for a cube effect, but we can choose from basic slide and carousel effects, cover flow, fade, flip, panorama, and many others. The effect parameters options just under will change from effect to effect. In this case, for our cube, we can toggle on shadows and slide shadows and choose their offset. But for example, if we choose cover flow, we'll be able to set the rotation, stretch, depth on the Z-axis, scale effect on slide, and a multiplier by which to multiply the effect. Let's update with our new effect and see how that changed our slider. As you can see, the slider is displaying the same slides, but with the effect we chose and set up. If we choose the creative effect, the effect parameters will be replaced by customizable options that can be different between previous and next transition. The creative effect, in fact, will allow us to create our own transition between slides by writing values for each translation and rotation on all 3 axes. With some tinkering, the creative effect is sure to amaze you and your users. Among all these effects, it's important to note that the slicer effect we've previously seen only works with images, just like the WebGL effects, which will let us choose between more than a dozen of WebGL shaders as transition for our slides. Just under our effect parameters, we will find 3 tabs that are the key to Slider Power's amazing customization flexibility. The first one is the Configure tab. Here we will find General Settings, Playback Settings, and Direction and Dimensions. In General Settings, depending on the effect, we may be able to choose how many slides are displayed per view at once, and the space between them. Regardless of the effect, we can set the number of slides to scroll per sliding action, should we want to skip 1 or more slides. Both 0 and 1 mean no slides will be skipped, 2 will mean 1 slide gets skipped, and so on. The touch ratio is the sensitivity of the swiping or touch, with higher values meaning higher sensitivity. The slide speed is expressed in milliseconds and represents the amount of time it takes for the slides to transition. Let's change it to make it higher and see how it affects our first slider. As you can see, it's quite slower now. Back in the settings, centered slides will center the active slide in the view. This is useful for some effects when there's more than 1 slide on screen at all times. We then have hide overflow options for both horizontal and vertical axes, which if toggled on will make sure the overflow will be hidden, and as such the scroll bars won't appear and ruin the visuals. Let's toggle this one off to show how important it actually is when necessary. This unsightly scroll bar on sliders like this, where part of slides might be hidden outside of the page, is the reason we turned that on. Let's take a look at the playback settings. We can set up autoplay and loop, and a speed for the autoplay, expressed in milliseconds. Direction and dimensions lets us choose the orientation of the transition. We can also control the container width directly from here, should it be necessary for the horizontal direction. Let's make our slider a cube again, and check out the vertical variation of the effect. Now to the Interaction tab. Here is where we can toggle on the aforementioned automatic navigation, pagination, and the scroll bar. We'll see that by toggling each of these on, further options will appear that will let us customize the resulting arrows, bullets and active bullet, and the scroll bar. However, leaving these off, slider power's flexibility truly shines. This is because we'll see in navigation control that we're able to assign any class to the role of next and previous navigation buttons. In this case, we've used these custom button widgets by assigning the next and prev classes to them, then mapping those classes in navigation control. We can do a similar thing for pagination, but we'll have to choose between three all-new slider power widgets: pagination fraction, pagination bullets, and pagination progress bar. Each will have way more design and customizability options over the automatic pagination, as we can see. When we've chosen the type of pagination widget to use, we can go back to pagination control and select the same type here in this drop-down menu. If we chose bullets, we can make them clickable and even set up dynamic bullets, with the individual bullets getting smaller and smaller the further away they are from the active one. Last but not least, in user interaction, we can allow the user to control the slider with the keyboard and with the mouse wheel. The last tab is the Advanced tab. These are more complex features for which you can find individual tutorials in the description and on screen. However, let's quickly go through them here as well. We can enable parallax effects by toggling on Enable Parallax here, then choosing the element or elements we want to animate according to parallax properties. For example, our first heading in Slide 2, going to the Advanced tab and navigating to Attributes to find Glue's own dynamic HTML attributes repeater. If we toggle on Slider Power Parallax, we will be able to choose Parallax key and set a value for that. We can add as many keys as we want here using the repeater. Let's use the Scale and Opacity keys, just for the sake of the example on this widget. With that set up, we can see the heading gets bigger and more transparent as the slider transitions from one slide to another. We can do this for every element of the slider to create a more complex parallax effect, or even to simply add a touch of animation to our slides without needing to resort to more complex GSAP implementations. Speaking of GSAP, going back to the Advanced tab of Slider Power, we'll see that we've toggled this on for this slider. This option here will simply allow us to give the slider an ID that we can then use in Glue's GSAP scroll trigger by selecting the slider tween. This will allow us to control the slider with page scrolling should we so choose, but in this case we've set it also to pin the slider to the viewport until all of the slides have been displayed. We do this by pasting our slider power ID here in this field, by using the container that holds the slider power container as trigger, and by pinning the slider power container itself in the pin options. It's important to note that should we use GSAP on our slider, we should turn off autoplay and loop in the playback settings options in the Configure tab of Slider Power. Going back to the Advanced tab, we can toggle on Nestled Slider if we intend to use this slider inside another Slider Power slider. Yes, that's correct. We can put a slider within a slider with Slider Power. Common settings will let us individually allow Slide Next and Slide Previous if we want to take some control away from the user. Allow them to operate the slider with touch controls, and we can change the cursor to be a grab cursor when hovering the slider. That would be the hand cursor that more clearly signifies that the slider can be dragged by mouse. Advanced Child Slider, the last option, is a feature that enables users to transform any HTML structure compatible with Swiper.js requirements into a slider by initializing a Swiper instance directly on it. This is done by specifying the slider container, the slider wrapper, and the slider child with selectors. It's important to note that this is an extremely advanced and experimental feature that will require further customization on a per-case basis and should only be used by very advanced power users. That concludes the Slider Power overview. We're all looking forward to see what amazing sliders you will create with this super powerful feature. Thank you for watching.